Hello class, welcome to Experience Design 1, Week 4. In today's lecture, we're going to cover MVP, a minimum viable product, user stories, features, managing features, and your second assignment. What is MVP? MVP stands for minimum viable product. A minimum viable product is a version of the product with just enough features to satisfy early customers and provide feedback for future product development. Basically, an MVP is a version of the website or app that would be considered functional without all of its potential features. So a little bit of background here is that software development, for websites and apps used to be sort of a monolithic endeavor. Uh, People would come up with an idea for what they wanted their product to be, and usually they'd have a ton of features. And so development for these apps and websites would take a long, long time to build into all these features and be quite expensive. It turns out a lot of the time that when the product is released, many of those features aren't used. And sometimes features that were unappreciated or thought were not that important end up being the most important part of the product. For example, Instagram started off as a wine site where people post pictures of bottles of wine and reviews underneath. And at some point, it became a site where people just posted pictures about anything. And that's when it took off. That was the real value to the user to be able to use this app as a way of as a social media app, the ability to post pictures and get comments from friends and likes and all that stuff. So that's an example of when you launch a product and a feature that you don't expect becomes the most popular part of the application. And you know, how do we develop for that? Well, we don't always know what the users are going to find useful. So one of the most important things to do is to build the app with the minimum amount of features that will be acceptable to the user as like a full experience. Uh, that way you can add more features over time. You can see what the users respond to, what they like, what they don't like, and tweak your application from then on in. This is cheaper, it's faster, and it gives room and time to pivot when you're developing. So this graphic illustrates, how to do an MVP and how not to do an MVP. Well, this isn't really a one-to-one correlation. The top one, the problem with it is you don't get the car until you've gone through all the steps. So you have to go through here, devise a wheel, a drivetrain, the body of the car, and then the roof, and then you finally have a car. The problem with this is that until you've got the car, you don't have anything that users can test or users can use. So the example below it, you start with a scooter. So you're talking about, okay, we're creating a vehicle that gets you from one place to another. What is the cheapest, easiest way to do that? Well, a scooter is because it has less moving parts. It still fulfills the kind of key objective of getting from one place to another. A bicycle would be a next step up from that. It's got cogs and a chain and gears. So that's a little bit more complicated to build, but you can validate what you've learned from your scooter to apply it to the bicycle. For example, people are scooting to and from home to work on their scooter. They kind of wish they could go faster. So a bicycle is a way to kind of have the scooter experience would make it go faster. The next step up would maybe be a motorcycle, which has an engine and all that stuff, but is less complicated than a car. This could have all the features that users want, like being able to get there without using any physical effort. Um, Better kind of ability to be in traffic, all that kind of stuff. And then finally, you have a car, which is the final one. But the great thing about these steps is you get feedback from each one. Now, obviously, physical things aren't designed this way. This is a metaphor, but software can be designed this way. You can do the software version of a scooter and then change that into the software version of a bicycle. If you were making a factory and you made a scooter factory, it'd be very hard to retool it to be a bicycle factory and then a motorcycle factory. So this is just a little graphic that kind of shows, minimum. Minimum's kind of bad because it's just nothing. It doesn't, it just has some features, but it won't let you do what you're trying to do. maximum viable is a feature heavy product. Like I said, that takes time and energy to build. It takes a long time to get it to market. You might have spent all this time and money on features that end up not being important. The sweet spot is in the middle, minimum and viable. So it's minimal, but it's still viable. So it's still useful as a product. To make that a little bit more real, if you were thinking about, creating a photo app, where would you start? What's the bare minimum you need for a photo app? Well, I think one of them is the ability to take pictures, obviously. The ability to see the pictures you've taken, maybe a gallery after you've taken them. And possibly, this is even on the fence, but the ability to share pictures. The only reason I added this, the ability to share pictures is because we live in such a connected world that, um, I think it's a minimum expectation from any kind of app that you can, if it's shareable, that you can share from it. So let's just contrast that with features that would be outside of an MVP. So you could build this photo app. You could try it out with users. Is it working? Great. They like it. They like it, but maybe it's a little basic. So what are the features you wouldn't include in an MVP for a photo app? Well, filters, they take time to develop, video functionality, advanced camera controls like shutter control and exposure. So you arguably could say automatic exposure is part of a basic photo app. Time lapse, panorama. These are all extra features that build on what the basic app is and adds extra value and functionality. So those things you probably wouldn't include, but you would roll out after the initial launch of the camera app and add filters, add video functionality, and do that over time. Apple does this quite often. With their phones, you can see it. The original photo app that came with the iPhone was very, very basic, and now it's so feature laden, it's probably a bit confusing to use. If we're going to, speaking of Apple, if we're talking about an example of what they did, is that you may not remember this, but a long time ago, there was no Apple stores. Apple's products were still sold through third parties. Apple didn't love this because they like having a great user experience from start to finish. And if they let third parties sell it, they don't have control of that kind of initial interaction between the customers and the product. This is problematic for Apple because, a lot of these third-party computer shops are, little mom and pop owned businesses, and they may not, their interior may not look nice. A lot of computer shops in the old days were pretty grungy places. That's changed a lot, and it's mostly due to the Apple Store, right? The Apple Store has increased the bar of what people expect in a branded electronic store. Microsoft has followed suit. They've seen what Apple has done and created their own Microsoft Store, which adopts a lot of the things that Apple first developed. Well, what they did when they were developing the store is they made one store, and I believe it was in California, and they tried out different things. So they made a prototype store in one place. They didn't say we're building stores and build them all over the place all at once. They wanted to get it right. So they used that prototype store to kind of find out what was working and what wasn't working. And after that was done, they went to the board and got permission to open a few more stores. And over time, they rolled out. I remember I heard about these Apple stores, and I was so jealous because they hadn't come to Toronto yet. It took quite a while. It took a few years before they opened their first store in Canada. That was because they like doing things right. They like getting the feedback and applying that knowledge to refining the product, in this case, the store. So let's talk a little bit about user stories. User stories are basically a way of capturing, from the user's point, what their experience would like to be with the product. This should be written from the user's point of view, like Mary would like, et cetera, et cetera. And so to try to capture what their experience is going to be with the app. For example, here we have, as a frequent moviegoer, I want to have all the information about the upcoming premieres in our local theater on my smartphone so that I don't have to check their website, one by one. So that's a user story. Like I said, the main focus here is to So stay focused on the user and what the user needs, not what the client needs, not what the programmers want. The most important thing here is to stay focused on the base user need. The characteristics of user stories are they're short but descriptive. User stories do not need to capture every detail about the user, their background, her ideas and motivations. Instead, they give an immediate understanding of what we are trying to accomplish with the product. User stories define the user type. For instance, in the sample story mentioned above, we can clearly identify the user as a frequent moviegoer. Note that we do not have to dive deeper into her personality, but just focus on the character traits related to our product usage. User stories outline a main need or problem that our product should solve. In our example, it is defined as having all the information in my smartphone. Now we're going to talk about something that's similar but a little bit different, user scenarios. User scenarios are a detailed description of what users do with the product and, are more importantly, why they do it. It is longer and more informative than a user story, but still you have to keep to the point and include only information that is highly relevant to the user's experience with the product. User stories outline the motivation and main goal of the user for visiting your website and using your product. A perfect user scenario comes in the way of a short story that clearly defines the context in which the product is used. For example, so it gives answers to the important questions such as, who is the user of our product? What does the user want to accomplish with our product? How is the user going to achieve her goals? Why does this user choose our product over available options? So here's an example of a user scenario. My project is a mobile app which will help people check when the bus and train comes. User scenario is every morning Zanub waits at the bus stop with her twins. She can't afford to be late. She needs to know when the bus will come so she can decide whether she should wait for the bus or take a taxi. The user story is, as a user, I want to use my smartphone to check when the next bus will come so I can decide whether I will wait or not. As a user, I want to be notified as soon as possible when the next bus is delayed so I won't waste time waiting. So from that, we can determine the possible features are get location, get bus train timetable, sort in chronological order, delay notification, so get a notification if there is a delay, plan route, and recommend a new route if the original is delayed. So you can see here how useful it is to create a user story and a user scenario to be able to determine what the features are that a user is going to need. So let's talk a little bit about features, in particular, feature creep. Feature creep is when this happens all the time. Just as a little bit of background here, this is something you have to deal with on a regular basis. You start a project, you think you have an understanding of what the objective is, and then as the project starts going, you get more and more requests for features from the client. Clients, when they have a budget to do something, always want to do a ton of things with it, usually too much, and usually stuff that won't fit in their budget. And so an ongoing struggle is, how do you make all those features fit in the budget? And the truth of the matter is you can't. You have to reduce the features. Now, why does feature creep happen? There's a belief that this is that the feature linchpin that launches your product into unicorn status. A big potential customer requests it. Your competitors have features your product doesn't provide. A belief that if you don't build the feature, then somebody else will, and you'll be at a competitive disadvantage. Your boss or coworker wants the feature. This happens more than you would probably imagine. You imagine the feature being helpful in the future. You want to incorporate emerging trends such as building social features to capitalize on current social media craze. Development time is quick. It'd be great to give customers the option to utilize this feature. You haven't released any features in a while, and you don't have any upcoming releases. Lots of customers are requesting it. What does lots of really mean? So these are just a few examples of why feature creep can happen. I can tell you the number one reason for feature creep is the client is asking for it. They have a set budget and they want to get as much done with it as possible. So you are left with the job of pushing back. Now, I should say another thing too, is that as an experienced designer, you won't directly be involved in dealing with feature creep. Feature creep is something that often tends to be the in the wheelhouse of the project manager. The project manager is the one that has to make the project uh, deliver on time and under budget. So it's usually them that has to deal with feature creep. Now, I think it's worth talking about feature creep because sometimes the extra features that are introduced by the experienced designer. The experienced designer wants the experience to be wonderful and has a ton of great ideas for it and wants to build these all into the first release. So it is good for you to know what the project manager has to deal with because ultimately you will have to work with your project manager to determine what features get included and what don't get included. So managing features. So how do you prevent feature creep? How do you make sure your project keeps going? Once again, I'm going to go through these slides quite quickly because most of this has to do with project management and not with experience design. It is useful for you to know about it because, like I said, you might be involved in actually creating the feature creep. You might be involved in creating the feature creep either because you want those features or because the client has asked you directly and you're not involved in the production and the programming of the rest of the project. So it's often good to be aware upfront with what your project manager is going to have to deal with so that you can help assist them in defining the correct features for launch. So this one's very, very basic, and I'll tell you, we use this all the time with our clients. Uh, it's called feature buckets. And what you do is you assign a bucket for all the different features. One is a must-have, the next is a nice-to-have, and the third is a not needed. And you use those buckets to assign different features to. It's quick and effective. It's very black and white. You know, there's a gray area and nice to have. There's a potential to change the scope. It can be too black and white. It might be hard for the client to decide because there's no input for what's best for users. I'll tell you from personal experience that on client lists, they usually just assign all the features to be must-have. They do not want to make the choice of deciding what goes in and what goes out. This second way of managing feature creep is something that we use as well, and it's a bit more effective. So you weigh everything against, low risk to high risk, and from the cost of development from low to high. So for example, is it high risk and expensive, like it's going to take a while to do? Then you probably should avoid it. Is it, low risk and expensive? Then do last. If it's, high value and high risk, do first. So that's a kind of a good way of taking potential features and being able to apply them to some kind of system that helps you decide what needs to be done. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the Kano model. I personally have never used this in business at all. It's quite complicated and involves a lot of like initial user research, which on many projects you just don't have the time or the budget to do it. But I'll talk about it so you're aware of it and understand it. So the Kano model works a little bit better because it's actually looking at all the features from the user point of view. Now the idea here is you take this model and you provide users with a questionnaire against each feature and they provide feedback. Now there's different ways of breaking down potential features for an application or website. The first one's called threshold or basic features. These are features that have to be in there. They're things that people assume are going to be in your application. So a good analogy would be a seatbelt in a car. If you saw a seatbelt in the car, you would be like, oh, wow, they have seatbelts. No, because it's an expectation. It should be there. You would actually notice that if it wasn't there, if you got into a car and you couldn't find the seatbelts, you'd be very, very disappointed. So the way to kind of, clients are only interested in this if it's not there, and then they're angry, they're unhappy. So these are the features you have to identify that need to be in there just to reach like a baseline. The next is performance features, and these are often to do with things like, a good one for websites is how fast the site loads. So it has to do with technology and being able to implement a very quick website, whether that's back end or front end. So these the the faster you can make a site, the happier the client will be. That's just a known quantity. So it's a linear line here. The faster, quicker, more usable it is, the better. So that's called a performance feature. And then the last one I want to talk about in terms of the Kano model is the excitement features. So these are features that the clients or the users are not expecting, but make their experience tremendously better. They're like also referred to as exciters or delighters. Like if somebody uses your app and they're completely delighted by by something in it, this is an excitement feature. These are usually something novel that people haven't seen before. Because if what ends up happening is one app will implement an exciting feature and people will love it, and then very rapidly all the other apps will implement it, and then it will stop being an excitement feature. It will be something that just people expect, right? Once upon a time, social sharing wasn't built into everything. The first, few websites and apps that did it, it was super exciting, and then after that, it just had to be on your website. So applying the model, I'm going over the super high level. There's lots of nuance and detail to it, but I don't think it's worth your time to get too invested in it. What you want to do is you want to get a bunch of testers to answer a questionnaire against each feature in your feature list. And they have to view it from two different angles. One, the functional angle. How do users feel if they have this feature? And then dysfunctional. How do users feel if they don't have this feature? So you ask them all the questions and they answer it for both the functional and the dysfunctional. And the questions are, there's 5 questions, or 5 possible responses. 1, I like it. 2, I expect it. 3, I'm neutral. 4, I can tolerate it. 5, I dislike it. And when you do that, you can create this chart that you can see on the side here. And based on correlating you have the functional on one side, you have dysfunctional along the top. If their functional requirement is they like it, but they're dysfunctional, if it's removed, they like it, then Q, it's questionable whether you need to include that feature. And you can go through the chart and the legend is down the side. So if something is liked by the functional question and it must be in the dysfunctional, so that feature must be included, then that would be an attractive or excitement element. So basically, this is just a more involved way of getting very nuanced and detailed user feedback on the feature list. Like I said before, you often don't get the time or the budget to be able to do this kind of in detailed user review of your potential feature list. So this would be for like a gigantic project for like a well-scoped big project for a bank or a utility company or the government of Ontario or something. And now we're on to assignment 2. So sorry, these assignments coming fast and furiously. You do only have 4 of them, 5. Anyway, so we're trying to give you enough time to complete these. We know that online learning is difficult and it's not as efficient or as easy as classroom learning. So we want to give you a bit of time with all of these. So assignment 2 is personas and competitor analysis. Based on the problem you framed in the previous assignment, you will do some additional research now focusing more on the point of view. Gather facts, information, examples, photos, and any other materials that would shed light on the problem. You will do personas and a competitor analysis to observe what other solutions have been made or anything that has a direct comparison to a similar problem. Also compare to other services that are not entirely related but exemplify the ideal experience. So step 1 is choose, well, you should probably use the one you chose for your last assignment, the site or app. Take a look at that. And the idea is we're trying to improve the user experience after gaining the information you gained from your empathy mapping exercise. Step 2, you should research the problem and collect information, assets, insights, etc. This is also where you conduct surveys, interviews, direct observation, focus groups, and personas. These should be included and organized in the research document in a clear and concise way. Be creative, but also know this is a document to collect and present your findings. So I think this slide's missing something. So the first thing you want to do is create persona. I'm going to do a lecture next week that deals with personas directly, so please wait for that to get more information. But a persona is essentially where you write a made-up story about a potential user. So, we're doing a site for Ontario Fresh, which is a government agency that wants people to shop locally for their produce. And for example, we chose one persona was a stay-at-home mom that is worried about the food she gives her children. She would like to get it, directly from the producer rather than from the supermarket, and this website enables her to do that. So that, in brief, is one kind of persona. So for this, we're looking for you to create 2 personas in the document at least. Like I said, I will do a lecture on this in more detail next week. Step 3, this is the meat and potatoes of it. You want to do a competitor analysis. And a competitor analysis is when you look at other websites or apps that do something similar to what your website or app does. So if you did Humber, for example, it would make sense to look at how other colleges and universities did the same thing. So if it's parking or food services or whatever it is, try to find 5 examples out there that do something similar. Now you can go outside, like, if we're using Humber as an example, you can go outside schools. If you find an app that's about something completely different but solves a similar problem, you can throw that in as well. Look for things that you can see among the competitors, things that are worse than what the website you're dealing with is, and things that are better. You're really trying to collect the better experience details so that it can inform you on how to make the website that you're working on even better. So in the assignment, it shows a grid to lay out the competitor analysis. I personally think you should do 1 page per competitor, include a screenshot of the competitor's website, and then list all the things that are good about that site. Maybe it takes only 2 clicks to get to the information you're looking for. The ability to click on a calendar makes it much easier to select the time and day, things like that. So you're looking for things that make the experience on that site better than the experience that you're having on the current website you're working on or app. So I know you're probably going to have questions about this. In our next sync session, I can answer those questions for you. And anyway, that's it. Thank you so much. It's taco time. I hope you have a great week this week. The weather is lovely, and I'll speak to you very soon.